be back here at the Sleep Forum and with a very special guest, Dr. Wendy Troxel. And as you are correct, she is the author of Sharing the Covers, but she's actually so much more than that. Dr. Wendy Troxel is Senior Behavioral Scientist at the RAND Corporation and adjunct faculty at the University of Pittsburgh and University of Utah. And she's also an internationally recognized sleep expert whose work is regularly cited by the media, including in forums such as CNN, ABC, BBC, Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times, as well as as many top-tier medical journals. And as we mentioned, she is the author of her very recent book, Sharing the Covers, Every Couple's Guide to Better Sleep. So great to finally meet you sort of face-to-face, face-to-screen, to face, Dr. Troxel.
So nice to virtually meet you as well.
Yes, yes. And, you know, I've been actually reading your book, or I read your book, but before we dive into it, for people who don't know you that well, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself. For example, what made you go into sleep research? Is this was this always a career goal, or did your career morph into that?
Yeah, great question. I do actually talk about this some in my book, but so I'm a clinical health psychologist by training. So I got my PhD in clinical and biological and health psychology, meaning that I've always been interested in how psychological factors influence not only mental health, but also physical health outcomes. And in particular, I've always been interested in why our relationships, our closest relationships, matter for our physical health. So early on in my career, I studied risk for heart disease and demonstrated that women in high quality supportive marriages had lower risk of developing heart disease symptoms as compared to women who were in low quality marriages or those who were unmarried or unpartnered. And through that work, I really started to want to better understand, how is it that relationships get under the skin to impact these very protracted disease processes like heart disease. And around that time, this was in the early 2000s, sleep research was really just starting to boom, honestly, in terms of research coming out to show strong and prospective links between sleep and physical health outcomes, including heart disease risk. So I got to thinking, wow, relationships matter for health, sleep matters for health, but no one really in the relationship world or the sleep world was looking at sleep in the context of close relationships. But guess what? Most human beings, most adult human beings, sleep with another human being. So we are, as a culture, naturally co-sleepers. And yet no one was studying sleep in the context in which it actually exists. So that's really how I became interested in sleep, by virtue of my interest in understanding why our social environments, including our closest relationships, can impact our health outcomes. And within that, I discovered, wow, this was this totally neglected area of sleep research, because sleep in the real world is mostly shared, and no one was studying it that way.
Oh, that's very interesting. And before we actually, one more question on your view on sleep research before we delve into your book, because if I Google your name, I stopped counting at around 60, but dozens and dozens of scholarly documents come up with your name attached to them. So you've done a lot of sleep research. Now, what's your view on, or your opinion on, the state of sleep research today? Do you think we've learned an awful lot, come a long way? Do you think we're still scratching the surface? Is there a certain direction you think sleep research should be heading?
Yeah, it's a great question. And many people don't know this, but sleep science as a field is a relatively young scientific field, beginning somewhere around 70 or so years ago. But what's actually really interesting, for a talk I gave yesterday, I pulled up an old slide I had with a cover of Time magazine, and it was in 2004. And that cover said, "The New Science of Sleep." And I just thought that was so amazing in terms of a reflection on the state of our field and how far it's come in less than 20 years. At least according to Time magazine, sleep was new as of 2004, because at least in terms of popular awareness or the media awareness, that was really the start of when people started thinking, oh, wow, sleep actually is an important behavior. It's not the thing that that you do when you're dead, that actually sleep matters for health. In terms of public awareness, that has really only sort of pervaded public awareness in the past 20 years. So to see where we are now with, many, best-selling books, both by sleep researchers and by non-sleep researchers, by all of the media around sleep, and by this growing cultural move towards recognizing the importance of sleep, as opposed to our historic tendency of undermining the importance of sleep, I think we've come a really long way, and there's a long way to go. I think that sort of the field is a really exciting place, particularly because there's so much industry and business interest in sleep, and there's so much technological advancements that are related to sleep, and so there's so much opportunity for emerging of sort of technological advances with the science, and we're learning so much still in terms of how sleep affects truly every aspect of our health and functioning, including big concerns in our society, like our risk for Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline. I think that's clearly a way our field will be moving in the future. And I'm involved in some of that research, and I'll also always try to have this angle of trying to better understand how our social environments are also embedded in these connections between sleep and important health outcomes.
Well, and we thank sleep researchers like you to help, to help get us there, help the public get to that awareness we need to get to so that we can use sleep to better our lives. And so onto your book, and I toyed with, well, do I take out my notes? But I wanted you to see that I actually did read your book. I have Post-its just about every.
That's impressive.
But sharing the covers, every couple's guide to better sleep, which could be gotten on Amazon and other outlets for those that want to read it. Now, I'm used to reading books because of my day job on sleep that usually have to do with neurochemical and neurochemistry, biology, hormones, sleep cycles, things like that. So when I got this book and I was like, it's a relationship book. Maybe it's not the kind of book that I normally read. But, by the second page, it was like, oh, this is a real no-brainer. And I like what you said, and you've already said it, which is, right, sleep is a huge part of relationships. And nobody was writing about that, right? How sleep affects relationships and relationships affect sleep. So I really do appreciate it. I think you make the point right away that the most or the largest amount of time that couples spend together is usually sleeping, right? So it's got to affect relationships. Now,
yes.
Yeah, the first point, you made a point also, which kind of I had forgotten and then made me chuckle, which was about the fact that people didn't always sleep in the same bed together. Couples, marriages, or people in relationships like marriages didn't always start out sleep. You think that, all your life, mommy and, people get married, mommy and daddy sleep in the same bed, but that wasn't always the case. And when I read that, it kind of reminded me of an anecdote about my grandmother. My grandmother passed away a year ago at the age of 100. So she was born in 1920. Wow. And was married very early. By the 1934, 35, she was married. And she and my grandfather went on to raise 11 children. Now, the thing is, they always slept in separate bedrooms. And it's, from the moment that my brother and I were old enough to chuckle about adult things, we laughed about all of the cross traffic and opening and closing of doors and wearing a groove in the hallway and the sneaking around that had to have happened in order to produce 11 children. But the fact is, people, 11 children from separate rooms. The fact is, people didn't always sleep in the same room. And could you talk a little bit about that, about when that started and why?
Absolutely. So, throughout my book, it's written for, the public, it's not just for an academic audience. That was a real goal of mine, but it's all science-based, and that was really an exciting, part of the journey. And in addition to incorporating all of the current science on relationships and sleep, I also was able to look to, other experts, for instance, historians who have written on the history of sleep, including Dr. Roger Eckerch from Virginia Tech, was a brilliant historian. And, based on his work and other historians' work, what we know quite clearly is that throughout human history, the pendulum has shifted back and forth as to the stigma attached to sleeping together versus sleeping apart. So in the medieval ages and earlier, the bed was actually a communal bed, not just a marital bed. The bed was shared among partners as well as children, sometimes among sort of workers in the household, or even sort of random travelers in the case of an inn. So the bed was always a communal experience. And that kind of makes sense when you think of it from an evolutionary standpoint. Sleep is a vulnerable state to be in. You're lying down, semi-conscious, your eyes are closed. And, in days of old, this was a time that you'd be vulnerable to potential threats from the environment. Now, we as human beings are social beings. And one of the best ways we have, sort of evolved to create safety in otherwise threatening times, which includes the night, is through our connections with others. So it stands to reason that the bed was this communal experience, in part because it afforded some protection and security. The other reason why beds were communal is also it gave you warmth. The bed was actually often the most expensive piece of furniture in the household. So having one communal bed that was shared was what people could afford. Fast forward to sort of the 18th century and really with the Victorian era, that's when we started to see the shift, starting with the upper class, of preferring, for a number of reasons, separate beds. And really it became a sign, there was some half-baked science ideas of the time that disease was transmitted through foul smells. Therefore, your partner's, morning breath was not just, a nuisance, but it could actually make you sick. Therefore, better to sleep apart. There were also some sort of, kind of puritanical views about cleanliness and hygiene that, led those who could afford it to choose separate bedrooms. And that really persisted for quite some time, with the middle class then wanting to follow the upper class trends. Fast forward even further, it appears that it was really around sort of the 1960s and the sexual revolution that we saw the pendulum shift back again towards this strong stigma against sleeping apart. That's when, kind of post-sexual revolution, I think that's really where these ideas that sleeping apart was necessarily a sign of a loveless or sexless union. Now, obviously, in the case of your grandparents with 11 children who had separate beds, somehow they figured out a way around this, as do people today who choose separate beds. So the important thing to note here is that the pendulum, in terms of the stigma we attach to this very intimate experience, has shifted over time. And so it's really important for people to get over these ideas of what they should do during this critical period of their lives, which happens to be one of the largest proportional times that we spend with a partner, that it's less about what you should do or what society says you should do, but really what works for you and your partner and what's going to help you both maximize the quality of your sleep.
Great, thanks. And that's actually very relevant, that whole discussion and the history, because now there's sort of this move that has been coined, the sleep divorce, right? And
Yes.
If you want, you do mention it in your book. And if you want to just briefly tell us, I think we all have a sort of an idea what it is, but if you want to tell us what it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so sleep divorce is an admittedly very pejorative term to describe the increasingly, common again, pattern for couples to choose to sleep apart. We're hearing more about it from celebrities and leaders and, your neighbors and your friends who are, now increasingly admitting that they're sleeping apart. And there's lots of reasons that we may be seeing this shift towards sort of maybe acceptance that there's lots of ways that happy couples, can choose their sleeping arrangements, whether it be sleeping together or sleeping apart. There are lots of reasons why we might be seeing this trend. It may be that as a society, we have growing waistlines, which increases our risk for things like snoring and apnea, which is a major reason why some couples choose to sleep apart. But there are other reasons as well. Children, differences in sleep-wake schedules. Maybe your partner works nights, whereas you work days, and there's just not the timing that's going to work for you to share a bed. Or maybe one of you is a really restless sleeper, or the other is a sheet stealer. There's lots of issues, from sleep disorders to really sort of practical concerns that make some couples make the choice, well, generally it's because they're not sleeping well when sleeping with a partner, that maybe the better alternative is to sleep apart.
Okay. Now, and I could see that, right? I mean, if somebody's up typing away on their computer and the other person needs to get some sleep, then it's hard to do in the same space. But if a person is having trouble let's say sleeping because their partner is snoring, and one of them goes to a separate room, so that doesn't really help the snorer. I mean, in fact, the snorer never figures he or she has a problem, right? Because they're sleeping. It helps the other person.
Apnea is often considered, or snoring is considered, a disease of listeners, although it's not really true, because there are significant health consequences for the apnea individual as well. But yes, go on.
But the snorer, although they think they're sleeping fine, may not be sleeping well. Are there what things can you recommend that are sort of quick things that a snorer can do so that they can sleep better, and maybe their partner can come back into the room?
Well, absolutely. Well, I mean, actually, the first thing I say to couples in which snoring is the major driver of sleeping apart is, well, first of all, rather than jumping to that potential solution of sleeping apart, look to the root source of the problem. And first, as one of the reasons why relationships are so health protective is that your partner is really a good motivator for positive health changes. So if you sleep with a snorer, the first thing to do is to say, honey, I really think you need to get that checked out. Because snoring could be indicative of a significant sleep disorder known as sleep apnea, which does have significant health consequences. So the first thing is look to the root of the problem. After that, yes, there are, if apnea is not the main cause of the snoring, there are lots of, there's, treatment for sleep apnea, certainly, which I would recommend. There's also a number of other devices and techniques that can be used to minimize snoring, from changing positions to nasal air strips and nasal dilators. All of these things that are particularly useful in the case of simple snoring that can help the snorer. And and if the solution for the couple is to sleep apart, the strategy for the couple is really to focus on the couple level goals. And a couple level goal when it comes to sleep is recognizing that both of you are actually going to be better partners when you're well slept, because we have lots and lots of research demonstrating that under poorly slept conditions, individuals suffer in terms of their communication skills, their empathy skills, they're more prone to conflict, they're more irritable, all of which can really set the stage for relationship conflict. So if the decision is to sleep apart, then do so in a way that really says, we should do this because it's going to make us both sleep better and therefore be better partners for each other. And at the same time, look for solutions to the snoring and of course apnea as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what you said about the couple sleeping being a motivator, because I know that, for example, if I wake up and find that my wife's in another room, that motivates me to, okay, I got to figure out what to do about this snoring thing. Maybe I won't have the glass of wine before I go to bed, because I like waking up next to my wife.
You like that, right? So it's a reinforcer. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So I get that. Now, so we can see now then it's apparent, or it's obvious, that sleep impacts relationships and relationships impact sleep. I mean, you cannot detangle one from the other, which is why this is a wonderful book, because it talks about, both of them intertwined the way they should be. Now, what if one person is reading your book and they're all on board and they want to read it, but the other person's like, nah, we don't have a problem, or I don't have a problem? How does that conversation go, so that, first of all, how do you suggest this book is read? Do you suggest people read it at the same time as couples, or one first, then share it with the other? And how do you get somebody who's kind of, recalcitrant to
Sure.
the book? Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want everybody to read the book, first of all. So I don't care quite how you do it, but I guess in my ideal situation, and actually I have heard from some couples who have done this, that they use the book as an opportunity to connect, and they're reading it to each other. I think couples reading out loud to each other is such a forgotten sort of ritual that couples in the past, especially in history, would have done. We're now so sort of distracted by our technology that we might be lying in bed with our partner, but we're both on individual devices. There's something really lovely and connecting about reading to each other, or listening to the audio tape. I've heard from other couples that that's what they do. It's a soothing voice. They get to sort of learn about an interesting topic. It's not distressing, and it's a way for them to have some conversation. Perhaps in bed before they fall asleep or some other time. But really, I think there's lots of ways. There's not one right way to read this book. And as is the case with many self-help types of books, although this is not just self-help, it's really about the science behind it as well, which I think many people find just sort of intrinsically fascinating. And then there's the history. I think it's often the case, that, one partner will be more interested, and, the other partner's, just not interested in that type of book or whatnot. But maybe, the one partner who's reading the book will give little tidbits, and that might entice the other to read it. Whether or not it's read as a couple or by one individual, there are strategies that, I think that can be shared among partners that can really help to negotiate this critical third of our lives that we spend asleep, and we don't really have great strategies for having these kind of discussions about what's working and what's not working in the bedroom, other than sex. Sleep occupies a major portion of our coupled existence. And yet so many people just assume, well, because I love this person, we're just going to fall naturally into this easy, restful sleeping together arrangement. That doesn't always happen. And it also doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the relationship. It's just that we need to start learning about how to effectively address the night, and what that means in the context of our relationship. So however you read it, the book is going to give tools for a couple that can be shared amongst each other to help navigate those issues.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one day that when you're on your best behavior, when you're nicest, and when you're really on your game, you tell your partner, hey, did you like the way things went today? Yeah, that's because I got a good night's sleep. You want more of that? We gotta explore this. Well, Dr. Troxel, I believe we are coming to a hard stop, or the end of our time here. So thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to I don't know what else you're working on, but we look forward to the next book that you may be in the middle of. And thank you for helping couples everywhere get better sleep, be better parents, children, coworkers,
better
friends,
all around human beings. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a real delight. Sorry that I do have to run, but pleasure to get to speak to you.
The pleasure was all ours. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.